At exactly 2:28 in the morning, a digital tether snaps in the absolute darkness of a quiet suburban home. It is not the loud sound of glass breaking or a door kicking open, but the chilling invisible silence of a Bluetooth connection failing. For an 84-year-old woman living alone, this specific connection is not a luxury device. It is a biological lifeline. A medical pacemaker embedded in her chest is designed to constantly transmit the rhythmic, electrical impulses of her heart to a mobile phone resting nearby. Every single beat is logged. Every anomaly is recorded. But at 2:28 a.m., that stream of vital data simply stops. The machine is searching for a signal that is no longer there. The phone has vanished. From the network or the heart, has been taken completely out of physical range. This is the ultimate biological timestamp of a nightmare. 41 minutes earlier, the external security perimeter of the property was deliberately plunged into total blindness. A surveillance camera designed to watch the front door went completely offline at 1:47 a.m. What unfolds in the terrifying 41-minute void between a blinded camera and a silenced heart monitor will completely dismantle the illusion of safety in modern digitized lives. This is a case where the digital footprints left behind are as violent as the physical evidence found on the concrete. If you want to understand the true forensic reality of crimes that standard news overlooks, you must subscribe to Crime with John and turn on notifications because we decode the exact timelines that killers try to erase. The vanishing of Nancy Guthrie is a masterclass in digital forensic reconstruction. The mother of the prominent television journalist Savannah Guthrie was supposed to be completely secure. She was wrapped in an invisible shield of modern surveillance and medical monitoring. Yet an accused intruder managed to slip through every single digital tripwire. The authorities would soon realize they were not hunting a random opportunist, but someone who understood the precise architecture of her digital existence. The absolute silence that followed the final heartbeat transmission was not an accident. It was the calculated signature of a completely new kind of predator. The most deeply disturbing aspect of this entire investigation is the profound illusion of absolute security. The world before the morning of February 1st, 2026, was meticulously ordered and closely monitored. Nancy was an 84-year-old woman who required daily medication and lived with limited physical mobility. Her mind was entirely sharp, but her body required the careful, predictable routines of a senior citizen living independently. To mitigate the risks of her physical vulnerability, her environment in Tucson, Arizona, was transformed into a digital fortress. She was not a careless individual living off the grid. She was surrounded by technology designed specifically to sound an alarm if anything went wrong. There were cameras watching the doors. There were applications tracking her movements. There was the constant silent conversation between her internal pacemaker and her mobile device. This is the modern promise of safety. We believe that if we wire our homes with enough sensors and strap enough monitors to our bodies, we are somehow immune to the chaos of the outside world. We believe the machines will save us. But the system is only as strong as the physical environment it occupies. The sheer volume of data her life produced every single day makes the sudden absence of that data incredibly sinister. Every time a door opened, a server somewhere logged the event. Every time she walked across a room, a motion sensor registered a change in pixel density. She lived a life constantly illuminated by invisible infrared beams and wireless frequencies. The tension in this case comes from the realization that this very network of security might have provided the exact map the suspected perpetrator needed. The anomaly is not that she was vulnerable. The anomaly is that she was arguably one of the most monitored private citizens in the county. Someone looking from the outside would see an impenetrable wall of digital defense. But a truly calculating mind looks at a security camera and does not see a deterrent. A calculating mind sees a puzzle waiting to be solved. The routines that kept her safe became the predictable patterns that a suspect could study. If a camera points at the driveway, there is a blind spot just below the lens. If a garage door takes exactly 12 seconds to close, there is a 12-second window of opportunity. The meticulous digital records of her life show a woman entirely at peace in her secure environment. She had no known enemies. She was deeply integrated into her family structure. Her daily requirements for medication meant she was tethered to the house and its routines. The unease settles in when you realize that all of this technology was functioning perfectly. It was doing exactly what it was programmed to do. It was watching. It was recording. It was waiting. But a camera cannot intervene. A pacemaker application cannot dial emergency services when a masked figure steps onto the porch. The very tools designed to protect her simply became the silent, objective witnesses to her sudden and violent removal from the world. The timeline of the evening leading up to the disappearance is maddeningly normal. It is the precise normality that makes the subsequent events so deeply terrifying. On January 31st, 2026, the evening began with family. At exactly 5:30, 2 p.m., Nancy ordered a ride service to travel to the home of her daughter Annie for dinner. The digital receipt of this journey is the first of many electronic breadcrumbs. She spent the evening surrounded by the people she loved. She was safe. She was engaged. She was entirely unaware of the darkness gathering around her own home across town. As the night drew to a close, her son-in-law Tommaso Cioni drove her back to her residence. The digital logs of the home security system record the exact moment of her return. At 9:48 p.m., she was back on her own property. 2 minutes later at 9:50 p.m., the electronic sensors registered the heavy garage door closing and locking into place. The physical perimeter was sealed. Tommaso drove away, leaving her secured within her digital fortress. The house was quiet. The next morning was a Sunday, February 1st, 2026. The morning routine of the Guthrie family included a shared digital experience. They regularly attended a religious mass broadcast online. It was a fixed point in their weekly schedule. When the time for the service arrived, Nancy was not present on the digital platform. The family waited. The minutes ticked by. Initial concern morphed into anxiety. By 11:56 a.m., the anxiety escalated into outright panic. Family members rushed to the Tucson residence to physically check on her well-being. The house stood completely silent. The doors were locked. The car was in the garage. But the house was entirely empty. At exactly 12:03 p.m., the frantic family dialed emergency services. The dispatcher recorded the escalating fear in their voices. The Pima County Sheriff Department responded with immediate urgency. Sheriff Chris Nanos himself would soon be directly involved in the rapid deployment of resources to the scene. First responders arrived within minutes. They breached the perimeter, expecting to find an elderly woman who had suffered a sudden medical emergency. They expected to find someone who had fallen and could not reach her phone. What they found instead was a flawlessly maintained home that felt entirely vacant. The medication she required daily was still inside. The personal items she would never leave without were untouched. The air in the house was perfectly still. But as the deputies secured the exterior of the property, the narrative shifted violently from a medical welfare check to an active crime scene investigation. The absolute silence of the interior was violently contrasted by the story written on the concrete outside. The officers looking down at the front entrance saw something that instantly triggered a massive escalation. In protocol, the mundane timeline of family dinners and online church services shattered completely. The sheriff recognized immediately that they were not dealing with a simple case of a wandering senior citizen. The facts laid bare on the property lines indicated a deliberate, targeted, and overwhelming breach of safety. The questions multiplied instantly. Why would anyone target an 84-year-old woman? Who would possess the capability to breach this specific secure perimeter without triggering an immediate alarm? The neighborhood was quiet. The sun was shining. But the evidence discovered by the arriving officers indicated that something monstrous had occurred in the dead of night. The initial physical search of the property yielded nothing but questions until the digital forensic teams began to dismantle the timeline of the night. The realization of what happened requires a journey back to the darkest hours of February 1st. The family believed the house was impenetrable, but the data told a radically different and far more sinister story. Investigators looked at the logs for the front door surveillance camera. The stream was supposed to be continuous, but the log showed a hard physical stop at exactly 1:47 a.m. The device did not lose power due to a storm. It was actively and intentionally disabled. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, working in conjunction with technology engineers, managed to pull fragmented files from hidden backup servers. The camera might have been disabled, but its final struggling moments managed to capture a sequence of images before it went completely dark. The recovery of these files provided the single most chilling revelation of the entire investigation. The fractured images revealed the figure of an alleged intruder standing directly on the property. The visual data confirmed this was not a neighborhood teenager playing a prank. The Suspect was a male standing approximately 5'9" to 5'10" tall. His entire body was obscured. His face was heavily covered, hiding all identifying features. He was dressed in dark clothing, designed to absorb the ambient light of the street lamps. Slung over his shoulder was a specific brand of backpack. It was a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. Every single detail of his appearance indicated massive preparation. He was armed. But the most terrifying detail captured in the recovered frames was his method of defeating the security camera. The accused suspect was holding a heavy-duty flashlight in his mouth, freeing his hands for a more delicate task. He was using a cut branch from a nearby tree to carefully and methodically cover the wide-angle lens of the camera. He knew exactly where the blind spots were. He knew exactly how the motion sensors registered change. He approached the device with the cold, calculated precision of a professional. At 1:47 a.m., he successfully blinded the primary eye of the house. He was now operating completely in the shadows. The digital system was not entirely dead, though. At 2:12 a.m., internal software detected a vague physical movement, but the system was too compromised to record a clear video file. The intruder was inside the perimeter. He was moving through the space where Nancy slept. The timeline is agonizing. From the moment the camera was blinded at 1:47 a.m. to the vague movement at 2:12 a.m., the intruder had complete control of the environment. He was navigating the house. He was approaching his target. And then the final catastrophic digital event occurred. At 2:28 a.m., the continuous Bluetooth signal from the medical pacemaker was violently severed. The application, searching for the heartbeat, found nothing. The intruder had either physically destroyed the mobile phone logging the data, or he had swiftly removed the 84-year-old woman from the broadcast range of the device. This was the moment of absolute abduction. This is the exact minute the timeline breaks completely. If you are questioning every single security camera in your own home, right now hit the like button, because the reality of this breach is that technology only records the crime, it rarely stops it. The suspected intruder was heavily armed, highly prepared, and operating on a strict internal clock. He executed a flawless intrusion, leaving behind only severed digital connections and a massive, terrifying void. The revelation of the suspect images shifted the entire weight of the local and federal authorities toward a massive manhunt. The digital ghost captured at 1:47 a.m. was now the most sought-after individual in the region. But digital data cannot be arrested. The investigators needed physical evidence linking the phantom on the camera to the reality of the missing woman. The search teams expanded their grid outward from the silent house. They returned to the most alarming discovery made during the initial welfare check. Right there on the front porch of the residence exposed to the morning light were undeniable traces of biological plus evidence. The forensic units meticulously documented and collected drops of blood staining the concrete entryway. The urgency of the situation demanded immediate laboratory processing. The Federal Bureau of Investigation prioritized the samples. Within hours, the worst possible fears of the family and the authorities were confirmed. The rapid DNA analysis matched the blood on the porch directly to Nancy Guthrie. The presence of her blood outside the secured perimeter of the house completely eradicated any lingering, desperate hope that she had simply walked away on her own. It proved that a physical, violent struggle had occurred at the threshold of her home. The timeline suggested this violence happened shortly after the camera was blinded. The blood was a physical anchor to the horrifying digital timeline. Investigators swarmed the surrounding neighborhood, knocking on every door and reviewing every piece of available civilian surveillance footage. They were hunting for the exit route. An individual carrying an 84-year-old woman cannot simply vanish into the night air. They needed a vehicle. During this aggressive neighborhood canvass, a crucial piece of potential evidence emerged from the community. According to The Guardian, a resident in the immediate area reported seeing a highly suspicious white van. This vehicle reportedly had been seen slowly driving through the residential streets on the days leading up to the targeted abduction. A white van is the most ubiquitous and frustratingly common vehicle on American roads. It is the perfect camouflage for a surveillance operation. The alleged presence of this van suggested that the intrusion was not a random crime of opportunity. It strongly implied a period of dedicated stalking. The suspect or suspects had reportedly mapped the routines of the neighborhood. They knew when the streets were empty. They knew the response times of local patrols. The investigation was now moving on two massive fronts. The forensic teams were tearing apart the interior of the house, looking for any microscopic trace of the intruder. They dusted for latent prints. They swept for foreign DNA. At the same time, the federal authorities were beginning the agonizing process of clearing the immediate family. In high-profile disappearances, the statistical reality is that violence often originates from within the closest circles. The investigators had to look at every single person who knew the security codes and the daily routines. They looked intently at the last person to see her alive. Tommaso Cioni, the son-in-law who dropped her off at 9:48 p.m., was placed under intense scrutiny. Every minute of his timeline after leaving the residence was meticulously verified, but the evidence was pointing away from a domestic dispute. He was confirmed to have a solid alibi, and authorities officially cleared him of any suspicion. The sheer tactical complexity of the camera blinding the specialized equipment and the subsequent biological evidence pointed toward a completely different class of criminal. The day, local police and the federal agents were standing in the middle of a perfectly manicured suburban street, holding a handful of digital fragments and confirmed biological fluid. They had the precise timestamp of a violent abduction. They had the shadowy image of a masked man holding a flashlight in his teeth. They had the blood of an elderly woman on the concrete. But they did not have a motive. There was no missing jewelry. There was no ransacked safe. The house was fundamentally undisturbed, except for the terrifying absence of its owner. The investigators were forced to ask the most difficult question of all. Why would a highly organized, tactically proficient individual risk a federal kidnapping charge to take an elderly woman in the middle of the night? The motive remained completely hidden in the dark. The standard protocol for a high-profile abduction involves an immediate and overwhelming federal response, focused directly on the family of the missing person. Agents establish a secure command center within the residence and tap every incoming communication line. They brief the relatives on exactly what to say when the inevitable ransom demand arrives. The psychological pressure in that room is immense, because every time the telephone rings, it could be the voice of the person holding their loved one hostage. The authorities were fully prepared for this exact scenario, expecting a frantic whispered conversation or a digitally altered voice demanding a massive sum of unmarked bills. But as the first 48 hours dragged out into an agonizing eternity, the telephone simply never rang. The silence within the command center became deafening, and this complete absence of direct communication shattered the established profile of a financially motivated kidnapping. It forced the behavioral analysis units to rapidly reevaluate the entire psychological makeup of the suspect they were hunting. If the masked figure did not want to negotiate with the wealthy family, then what was the actual motive behind the violent extraction? This vacuum of information inevitably gave birth to a massive wave of public speculation and dangerous internet rumors. One of the most pervasive and legally perilous falsehoods that flooded online forums was the story of a bizarre, anonymous confession. Thousands of people shared a completely fabricated narrative claiming that a guilt-ridden caller had contacted a local police precinct in the middle of the night to confess to the crime and describe the location of the victim. This rumor spread so rapidly that it deeply shocked the entire surrounding town and briefly derailed public search efforts. But federal authorities categorically confirmed that no such confession call ever took place. The investigative teams were forced to divert precious resources to publicly debunk this false narrative. The reality was far more terrifying than the internet. Rumors, because the suspect was completely composed and executing a highly sophisticated plan that deliberately kept the immediate relatives completely in the dark. The investigative teams realized that the silence was not a sign of panic, but a deliberate psychological weapon. The perpetrator knew that law enforcement was waiting at the other end of the family telephone lines, and by refusing to engage through traditional channels, the kidnapper effectively neutralized the entire hostage negotiation strategy. This profound complication left the authorities grasping at shadows. They had a perfectly executed physical breach and a complete lack of traditional demands. The tension within the law enforcement community reached a boiling point as they struggled to anticipate the next move of an adversary who refused to play by any established rules. Tell us what you think in the comments before we reveal the truth about where the demands actually went. The agonizing wait continued as the investigators pored over the digital files again and again, looking for anything they might have missed in the initial chaos. They analyzed the specific tactical movements, But without a direct line of communication to the suspect, the investigation was trapped in a terrifying valley of unanswered questions. They knew the capabilities of the intruder, but they were completely blind to his ultimate objective. The relatives were left to suffer in a void of uncertainty, while the federal agents waited for a digital ghost to make a mistake. The assumption was that the kidnapper was simply biding his time, waiting for the initial intense scrutiny to fade before making a move. But the investigators had completely misjudged the ego and the extreme modern methodology of the predator they were tracking. The suspect had absolutely no intention of waiting for the attention to die down, because the public attention was the central component of the entire operation. The silence directed at the house was a calculated misdirection designed to maximize the shock value of the true ransom demand. The unbearable silence was finally broken, but the communication did not arrive on the secure federal lines. It arrived in the digital inboxes of high-profile entertainment journalists and local news producers. Newsrooms across the country, including prominent outlets like TMZ, suddenly received a series of highly encrypted anonymous emails. The contents of these digital messages completely redefined the scope and the terror of the investigation. The sender was not asking the relatives for a quiet exchange of funds, but was instead turning a violent personal tragedy into a horrific public spectacle. The emails contained specific non-public details about the exact layout of the crime scene that only the individuals who breached the property could possibly know, confirming the terrifying authenticity of the communication. The perpetrators were explicitly demanding a massive ransom payment, but they required the funds to be transferred exclusively through untraceable decentralized cryptocurrency networks, specifically demanding Bitcoin. This was the moment the entire narrative fractured. The kidnappers were deliberately bypassing the immediate victims and weaponizing the national media apparatus to broadcast their demands to the entire world. They understood that the extreme public visibility of the television journalist relative was their greatest leverage. By sending the extortion notes to the press, they guaranteed that the demands would be instantly amplified across every major news network, creating an unprecedented level of public pressure. The sheer audacity of this strategy left veteran investigators deeply unsettled, because the criminals were treating the abduction not as a secret negotiation, but as a highly coordinated media campaign. The emails were coldly analytical, devoid of any emotion, and meticulously formatted to ensure maximum journalistic impact. They detailed the specific cryptocurrency wallet addresses where the digital funds were to be deposited and outlined severe consequences if the demands were not met on the public stage. This shift from private extortion to public cyber terrorism required the federal authorities to immediately pivot their entire strategy. They were no longer just searching for a physical location. They were now engaged in a complex international digital manhunt, trying to trace encrypted communication packets routed through multiple anonymous servers around the globe. The public nature of the ransom demand also created a massive risk to the safety of the missing woman. If this twist surprised you, subscribe to Crime with John, where we follow the evidence, not the rumors. The perpetrators had effectively crowdsourced the psychological terror, forcing millions of viewers to watch the agonizing countdown in real time. The authorities had to establish an immediate blackout on certain specific details contained within the emails to maintain operational security, but the core demand for digital currency was already a matter of public record. The use of Bitcoin completely eliminated the traditional physical drop-off point, where law enforcement usually coordinates ambushes and arrests. There was no bag of cash to track, and there was no physical meeting location to monitor. There was only a string of alphanumeric characters representing a digital wallet, existing somewhere in the vast, untraceable expanse of the internet. The investigators were forced to rely on highly specialized cyber task forces to analyze the blockchain transactions, hoping the suspects would make a critical error when attempting to move the digital funds. The chilling reality was that the people responsible for the brutal physical extraction were simultaneously sophisticated enough to execute a flawless, encrypted, digital extortion campaign. They were equally comfortable operating in the physical shadows of a suburban yard and the deep encrypted layers of the dark web. The entire country watched in horror as the media outlets debated the ethics of publishing the demands, while the federal agents desperately tried to break the encryption on the outgoing emails. The perpetrators had successfully hijacked the national conversation, proving that in the modern era, the most dangerous criminals do not just want money, they want an audience. While the cyber divisions chased encrypted currency across the globe, the physical search teams desperately tried to maintain momentum on the ground. The massive dragnet expanding outward from the silent house finally yielded a tangible physical clue 2 miles away from the initial breach point. Searchers combing the area discovered a discarded pair of gloves that investigators strongly believed were worn by the suspect during the intrusion. This discovery provided a sudden surge of desperate hope. The forensic laboratories aggressively processed the fabric, extracting cellular material left behind by the wearer. The biological sample was carefully loaded into the massive federal DNA database, expecting an immediate match to a known violent offender. But the system returned a chilling result. There was absolutely no match. The DNA profile belonged to a complete phantom, an individual entirely unknown to the criminal justice system. The physical trail was rapidly growing cold despite the massive allocation of resources. According to reports from Livement, the situation grew even more haunting when a set of sleepwear was reportedly discarded near the broader vicinity of the search area. This unconfirmed detail added a deeply disturbing psychological layer to the physical search, suggesting a chaotic flight from the scene. But the most terrifying complication emerged from the very technology company that helped recover the initial hidden camera image. The cloud storage provider flagged a severe anomaly regarding the digital timestamp attached to the file, showing the masked intruder. Initially, the data suggested the photograph was captured on the night of the abduction. However, a deeper forensic analysis of the metadata revealed a highly disturbing technical glitch. The internal servers indicated that the exact same image file might have actually been generated on January 11th, which was 20 full days before the actual disappearance. If this deeply buried metadata proved to be accurate, it meant the entire timeline was catastrophically wrong. It meant the predator was not just incredibly lucky on a single night, but had actually been standing in the yard testing the security equipment weeks in advance. It transformed the crime from a rapid tactical strike into a meticulously organized abduction planned with terrifying patience. The technology company could not definitively confirm which timestamp was the absolute truth, leaving the investigators suspended in a nightmare of conflicting data. The authorities are now hunting a ghost who leaves behind no usable DNA, communicates exclusively through encrypted international servers, and deliberately manipulates the digital fabric of the evidence. What this case teaches us about the evolution of modern extortion is incredibly profound. We are witnessing the terrifying weaponization of our own security systems. The blind spots in smart home networks are no longer just vulnerabilities for simple property theft. They are active intelligence gathering nodes for highly sophisticated criminal syndicates. The technical manipulation required to blind a camera without triggering a system-wide alert demonstrates a level of forensic countermeasure that completely outpaces standard civilian protection. Furthermore, this investigation highlights a massive paradigm shift in criminal behavior. The transition from demanding physical currency to extorting anonymous, decentralized cryptocurrency sent directly to public media outlets represents a new era of digital hostage-taking. Law enforcement agencies are now forced to operate not just as physical trackers, but as advanced cyber analysts, hunting alphanumeric codes across international borders. The system is struggling to adapt to predators who understand network architecture as well as they understand physical violence. The ultimate fate of the missing woman remains a devastating mystery. The physical clues end in an empty field 2 miles away, and the digital trail vanishes into the encrypted depths of the internet. The silence remains absolute. Hit the bell icon so you are the first to know when the federal authorities finally trace those encrypted demands, and stay vigilant because we will see you in the next file.